There we go.
There we go. Welcome to Coding After Work stream. And happy Thanksgiving for those of you who celebrate that. We today have an amazing guest, somewhat familiar for some of you, I would say. But first, we also have some great news. We still have sponsors.
We do. And the first one is Progress Telerik. We are super excited about having their amazing Blazor components as sponsors, or we have them as sponsors, but we want to talk about their Blazor components. We use them we use the controls at work, and they're super easy to get started. It's very easy to be super productive, and you can customize them whatever you need. Now, chances are that they have what you need. Currently, they have more than 60 truly native components. Last stream, they had only 50, so things are happening very, very rapidly.
I know you said this last time, but could you explain once more what is truly native?
Sure. So truly native means that what they could have done is that they could have taken their JavaScript libraries and just ported them and put a Blazor shell around them, if you will. But what they have done is that they have rewritten every component in C# for Blazor.
There you go. Kind of cool.
It is.
Yeah. And we also have another sponsor, 1337, a knowledge-driven company, consultant company, I should say, that's specialized in innovative custom-built software solution. They, as well as Progress Telerik, are very involved in the developer community, which is something that we really love.
Yeah. And we've been working with both companies for years, and we are very, very proud to have them as sponsors.
Definitely. But now, time to introduce our guest.
Who could it be?
You don't know. You don't know.
No?
Oh, welcome, Jimmy Engstrom.
Oh my God, should I have prepared something?
Yeah. You know that talk I've been saying you should have?
Oh, the one in the calendar.
Yeah, that's today.
Oh, yeah, no.
Take it away.
Thank you. So welcome to a talk about Blazor. Now, I'm a little bit curious, how many of you in the chat have worked with Blazor before? So please just write anything in the chat. It will be interesting to see how many of you have tried Blazor before. Now, as developers, we can develop for many different platforms. We have desktop, mobile, games, cloud, or web server side, or even IoT. All of these different platforms has one thing in common, and that's they have many different languages that you can write with. But there is one more. The code that lives inside of our browser. And in the browser, we basically only have one language, JavaScript. Now, I know there are other languages as well that transpile or even compile to JavaScript, but there's only really JavaScript running inside of the browser. Now, I personally get a warm, fuzzy feeling when I work with JavaScript. I hate you! I can imagine that some of you share this feeling. So we have two options here. We can start to program underwater because nobody can see you cry, or we can do something about it. And I'm here today to show you another way, Blazor. So we're going to talk about what Blazor is and how it works. My name is Jimmy Engstrom, and I have a confession. I truly hate JavaScript from the bottom of my heart. I'm a Windows development MVP, and I work as a web developer at Erik Penser Bank here in Stockholm in Sweden. We've been using Blazor in production since October last year, so a little bit more than a year now. We have Blazor running in our CRM system and our customer portal. I also run a company together with my wife called Awesome Dev. not my wife. You met her earlier. Her name is Jessica, but the company is called Awesome Dev. And we also run a podcast called Coding After Work and a Twitch stream, and now we are even on YouTube. So if you're not a subscriber to our Twitch channel, please jump in there, subscribe. If you're not following us on YouTube, we will love for you to do that as well. So on my spare time right now, I'm writing a book focused on Blazor and .NET 5. And the most important thing, and the one thing that I can, almost promise you that no other book has, that's raccoons on the cover. But enough about me. Let's dig in. What is Blazor? At NDC Oslo back in 2017, Steve Sanderson had a WebAssembly talk. And he thought that, would it be possible to challenge WebAssembly? Could we do something really, really cool? And could we involve JavaScript, not JavaScript, C# into WebAssembly? So he took an open source project. He tried to get C# code running inside of WebAssembly. And he did. It worked phenomenally in a command line app. But Steve is Steve. So he thought, could we take this another step? Could we make this even cooler? So when he steps onto the stage, he has WebAssembly running .NET code. He got full IntelliSense in Visual Studio, and everything is just working. He even had the name Blazor already in place. And in the audience, there was other ASP.NET team members, and they went, he showed what? What is this? Is amazing. And they took it back to the office, and they had it as an experimental project for, I think, nearly a year, talking about, should we implement this or not? And, it became a product, finally. And, it was I think it was in September last year that it was released, the server-side version. So it's been around for almost a little bit more than a year. But what is Blazor? Well, it's a SPA framework, single page application framework. It works similarly to React or Angular. It has kind of the same way of thought, if you will. It has a shadow DOM or now I forgot the name of what React and Angular calls it, but a render tree in this case. So some kind of DOM that it can manipulate, and we will come back to that in a bit. The name comes from a combination of browser and racer. So apparently there was a B and an L happened to walk by, and then we have Acer from Racer. So Racer is the Microsoft way of mixing C# and HTML in the same file. And we will take a look at that in just a bit as well. There are two hosting models. The first one is server-side, which we're going to cover first. And then we have client-side or WebAssembly, which is the one that fairly recently came out. So let's start with server-side. So we got a server. In our server, it's going to be Racer code running in the server. And that is going to, Blazor is going to take the output of that and work with it. So Blazor is going to take the output from the Racer components, create a render tree, and put the HTML inside there. Now on the browser side of things, we got a browser, we got a DOM, and a little piece of JavaScript. The JavaScript is responsible to create a SignalR connection between the server and the browser. So it's going to take all the things that the browser doesn't know about at this point, push those changes over the SignalR connection and into the JavaScript. The JavaScript is then going to update the DOM. Great. So we have a button there as well. So if I click the button, the event is going to go to the JavaScript over the SignalR and into our Razor components. Our Razor components then is going to run the code, whatever it may be, change the output. In this case, it's a little bit subtle. It says Blazor rules with an S instead of a Z. And it's going to push only that change over SignalR. Now, this isn't showing the whole truth because it's not pushing over the H1 tags in this case. It's going to push over an ID and the change. And then the JavaScript is going to be responsible for updating the DOM. Like that.
We have got a question for you.
We got a question.
Yeah. So Daniel is wondering if he can use F#.
Wow. Why would you want to? I'm sorry. I actually don't know if you can use F#. I assume you can. But I need to get back to you on that. I'm not sure. I assume that you could use any .NET language, but I'm not sure about that. You will not be able to use F# inside of the Razor files, I believe, but I'm not sure about that either. So I need to check that out. Good question. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a to-do app. And I really love my puns. So I had to name it Manamana because to-do. I cannot sing for the life of me, but I do like puns. So let's switch over to Visual Studio. Let's take a look. Let's close all of this down first. There we go. So let's take a look at the project to start with. I have the Manamana project, and that is the server-side Blazor project. We have a Razor project, which is going to be the shared code between the different projects. We also have a shared project, which only has the things that we're going to share between the server, in this case an API, and the client, in this case server side, or in a couple of minutes also the WebAssembly version. And we have the WebAssembly version. But we're going to start with the Manamana project. So let's take a look at what it comes with. So this project this is basically file new, and I've added some things to it just to be able to show you. So this is the counter app. So let's go through it. So up here, we have the counter or the page directive. This is telling Blazor that if I go to /counter, this page is going to show up. And the really nice thing with Blazor is that you can use both these components as components within other components, and you can use them as pages, as you can see here. So /counter will go to this page. We have a headline. We have a paragraph with an @ over here. So if you haven't used Razor syntax before, the @ is going to transfer over to C#. So now we are in C# world, and we're going to type out the value of the current count. we have a button and an on-click event handler. Now, as you can see, we also have a @ before the on-click. So this is telling us that we're switching from the JavaScript on-click that we might be used to a C# version. So in this case, we're saying we want the C# on-click on the ordinary HTML tag. So when I click the button, I want it to run the increment count method. And we have that down here. And what it does, it's updating the current count with 1. So what is actually happening is that when I press the button, it's going to run the increment count. The current count is going to count up. And as you can see, I can't draw either. And the current count is going to update the current count. So let's run this project and see what happens. So if I click the counter, I can click the click me button and it's going to count up. Now this could be the rest of the talk, just me standing here clicking, because this is so cool. We already have an interactive app written completely in C#. So if you take a look at what is happening on the network, we reload the page. You see here that we have some style sheets, a little bit of JavaScript, and we have a WebSocket. The WebSocket is going to send bytes back and forth whenever I do something. So everything that's happening is happening on the server. I'm just sending events back to the server is executing the code and sending back whatever change I need in the UI. We also have some other methods. We have fetch data, which is fetching data. And we will go back to that. Actually, we can take a look at that right away. Let's pop into fetch data. So in this case, we have forecasts. We could take a look at this one down here. We have an array with weather forecast objects. And on initialize sync, we get those weather forecasts from a service. And as soon as the forecast variable is not null, it's going to create a table and show each value of that table. Great. So let's start with our to-do app. So here I have a to-do list.razor, and it's using something called a to-do list component, and that's what we're going to build together. So if I pop down to our Razor project, I have a to-do list.razor down here, which is the project where we're going to add all the nice stuff. We also have a to-do service. Now, the to-do service is only doing the API calls to an API. I have an API written in C#, living in Azure. We don't need to, this is not an API talk. You probably know already how to call an API, so I'm not going to go deeper into that. So let's pop into our to-do list. Now, the first thing we need somewhere to put our items. So let's create one of those. We're going to create a list with a to-do item. And we're going to call it items, and we're going to set it to an empty list of to-do items. So let's take a look at our to-do item. The to-do item is just an ordinary C# file. We have the same one in the API project. We have the same one. We're going to have the same one in the server project, and we're going to have the same one in the WebAssembly project. It has an ID. It has whether or not it's done. The title has 2 attributes. I'm saying that I require it to be there. And for some reason, actually for demo purposes, I have a minimum length of 5. And I also have a description. I want to know what I'm supposed to do. So let's pop back to our list. And I also need to add our ToDoService, so the way that we will call the API. And we do that by typing @inject and then what we want to inject, in this case the ToDoService, and we're going to call it service. That's pretty generic, but we're going to call it that. And then we need to load the data. So let's just create a protected override of the uninitialized async. This is a great method where you can load data. If you're not switching between different values, then you want to use onParameter set, but we will do that in another file as well. So I'm gonna say set my items to await service.getItem. So I'm gonna call the service get all the items back. And I'm going to await the uninitialized async on the base class as well. So the get items is only going to our service, deserialize the JSON I'm getting back into our to-do object, and return it. Then we want to show the item somehow. So I have a section, I have a class to do, I have a UL, so a list of something. And we're going to do a for each. We're going to iterate over the items. And I want to create a list item. And I want to have an input box, which is going to be of type checkbox. And I want to bind that to the items is done. So whenever I unclick or click this item, it's going to change the item in the list as well. And I will show that in a bit. And on click, I also want to run a method called update item. So I want it to pop back and update the server as well. And I'm going to create NavLink. So NavLink is the Blazor way of creating a link, but it's also going to give me a couple of really nice features. And that is, I'm going to get classes if the URL is the same as the link in the NavLink. It's going to set active as a class. So this is perfect for menu items, for example. So I'm going to say href is going to be /todo, and I'm going to send in the item ID. I wanted to say the title of the item as well. Then I'm going to add a button. But this button is going to be a danger button, because the button is going to delete an item. And built into these templates, we have Bootstrap, and that is what I'm using here as well. So I'm going to say onClick, again with the @sign. I'm going to run the method delete item, and I'm going to send in that item, the current item that is rendering on the in the loop. I'm going to say, well, I want the button to say delete. I'm going to end the li. There we go. Great. Now we need to add a couple of things. We need to add, we have an update item, we have a delete item. So let's run, let's say service update item, and we're going to just send in the item. I'm going to say await here as well. I believe this one is awaitable, yes. And on the delete item, and I mean, deleting something is a little bit more dangerous. So we need to think about, do we need to warn our users somehow? So in this case, we're going to do a var result, and I'm going to do a JavaScript interrupt So I'm going to say JS runtime, invoke async. I'm going to expect a bool back, true or false. I'm going to run the JavaScript confirm command. I'm going to send in, do you really want to delete this? And if the result is true, well, I'm going to run the service. I'm going to delete the item. And I'm also saying that I'm going to remove the item from the items in the list. And in this case, I'm also saying state has changed. So normally I don't have to warn Blazor that I've changed something. It's going to realize that all by itself. But in this case, I'm not sure when the JavaScript is going to get back to me. I might not be in this in that particular method at that point. So I need to say, but well, state has changed. And I'm going to end the service or the method as well. But we also need to have a JS runtime, and that is we simply do an inject up here. I'm going to say inject iJS runtime, and I'm going to name it JS runtime. Great. And we also need to have, or we want to have, a title. So I'm going to add a title, an H2 in this case, my items. I'm going to add a parenthesis, and again with the @ sign. So now I'm in C# world again. Items.where, where the item is not done yet. And I'm going to count them. That's what I'm going to show. So if I run this, I'm going to go to my to-do list, and something has gone wrong. So if we press F12, we can go into our console, and here you will be able to see the error message. This is a C# error message. This is no crazy JavaScript message. It says, well, what does it say? Well, service. It cannot provide a value for property service. That is true, because I haven't added that yet. So if I go to my service right here, or my server-side project, I can go into my startup, and down here, I need to add dependency injection for that service. So I'm going to say service.addScoped and the to-do service. The dependency injection works a little bit differently between the different projects. I'm not going to go into that today, but if you have any questions regarding that, I will be happy to do that as well. But for this, in this case, I'm going to say add scoped and the to-do service. So this is going to create a to-do service for the length of the SignalR connection in this case. I'm going to save that. I'm going to start the project again. And let's go to our to-do list. It should load something. There we go. So I have my items. I have a to-do list item. Now I can click this, but we haven't built that yet, so it's not that exciting. If let's reload that. There we go. If I click the checkbox, it's going to go. It's going to change my items left up here directly. So if I just change it, I haven't said anything to Blazor that I want the number to change, but it figures it out. If I click the delete button, I'm going to get the JavaScript message. Do you really want to delete this? No, I want to keep this. That's a good thing to have. Sweet. So we also want to be able to add things. So I'm going to go into something called a DoItemEdit. And we need to have an item or an ID. So I'm going to say a parameter. So the parameter makes it possible for me to inject or supply the component with a parameter. So I'm going to say parameter public int to do ID, and I'm going to just get and set on that one. So now I will be able to set an ID on that item. I want to add a form. Now we're going to do that a little bit quicker. I'm going to add all of it in one go. So here we have an edit form. Now edit form is going to be the normal form that you're used to, but it has a couple of really neat functions as well. I'm going to supply a model. In this case, it's the item. I have the onValid submit. So if the form is okay, everything looks fine, it's going to run the save item method. Then I have a custom CSS class provider. So in .NET 5, this is one of the really nice features that came with .NET 5. With .NET 5, I am able to supply what kind of different classes I want the input controls to have. And we will come back to that in just a minute. I'm also supplying the data annotation validator. So I want the form to check for data annotations and see if the form is okay or not. Then I have a form group and an input text. Now the input text is going to render a input tag with the type of text. But it also has a couple of really nice features because as you can see, I'm writing @bind_value. So the @bind in this case is telling Blazor that I want to bind something to the property value. So there's no property called bind value. It's called value, but it's understood by adding the bind before that I want to bind to that value. I want a two-way binding in this case. And I want to set the value of the title of the item. I'm also adding a validation message. And I want it to be set for the title. So the input text is going to add the validation properties or validation classes for me. So I will, when the form validates, if the input text is for some reason invalid, it's going to add a class called, I believe it's called invalid, .invalid. Same thing goes with the validation message. It's going to fill in whatever error message it has. Then we're doing the exact same thing for an input text area. We're binding it to the item description. We have a validation message for the description. And then we have a button. And it's of the type submit. This is no special Blazor button. It's just a submit button that is going to submit the form. It's going to run the validations, and it's going to run the save save item method. And I mentioned that it got if the input text validates okay or not, it's going to get a couple of classes. Now, these classes are Blazor specific. So it's going to, I believe it's .valid and .invalid. But I also mentioned that we're using Bootstrap, and Bootstrap doesn't have those. So we need to add functionality by ourselves to get that kind of functionality. Or we can use the custom CSS class provider. And this is a class that I built, I actually blogged about it today. So if you take a look at that one, we go into components, we check the custom. Actually, we're going to start with this one. The Bootstrap field CSS class provider. So the edit form has something called a cascading parameter or cascading value. It has something called a edit context. So every input control is going to get that context, and you can add error messages to that context, or it's going to do all the validation for you together with the data annotation validator. So in this case, I'm using the field CSS class provider, which is new for .NET 5. I'm going to override the get field CSS class, and instead of the .valid and .invalid, I'm going to supply the isValid, which is a Bootstrap version of this class, and isInvalid, which also is the Bootstrap version. And I'm also adding the form control right there. Instead of what I could have done is I could have created a input text. I could have added that class into that, and I could create a new input text and add the form control into that one. But instead of doing all that, I'm just saying, hey, for all the items the items that has this kind of validation, I want you to add the form control and whether or not it's valid or not. I also added a custom CSS class provider. So this one is taking the cascading parameter from the edit context and adding the Bootstrap field, the CSS class provider, into that. So it's just going to work. It's going to make the code a whole lot nicer. So if you pop back to our to-do item, you see here that I'm adding custom CSS class provider. I'm setting the provider type, Bootstrap class, CSS class provider, which is going to make sure that all my controls inside of this edit form is going to get the right class for Bootstrap in this case. All right. Let's take a look at what we need to do next. So when I load the Blazor control, I want to load some data. So I'm going to pop in here. I'm going to say if the to-do ID is not 0, so if it's 0, I'm going to expect that I'm trying to create a new object. So I'm going to say that item is equals, and then I'm going to call the service, the get item. I'm going to send in the to-do ID. And if it's not, or if it is 0, I'm just going to say set it to a new object. Perfect. Now, I also have the save item method. And if the item is 0, I'm going to just add the item with send it to the service. And if it's not 0, it's probably an item I already have. So I'm going to just update the item. But we're going to take this one step further because I wanted to reuse this control. I want it to be able to live on the page, and I want it to be able to live with a URL. So I'm going to add an event callback. I'm going to say parameter. I'm going to say public event callback, and I want it to send back a to-do item. Now, the event callback is a Blazor specific event. It's going to make sure that when the event is called, when the method that is listening to that event is called, it's also going to run a state has changed after that. So if you do any changes in the page while running that method, you don't have to add the state has changed as well. And I'm going to call this item added and I get it set. I'm also going to invoke that in the save item method. I'm going to say await item added, invoke async, like that. These can never be null, so you don't have to do any null checks on them. That is handled for you. So we're going to go back to our to-do list. I'm going to add the edit component. So I'm going to say ToDoItemEdit. That's the name of the component. Item. I'm going to listen to the item added event, and I'm going to run the item added method, which we of course need to add as well. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to add the method item added, and it's going to get the added item in as an parameter. And I want items. I'm just going to add it to the collection of items. I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to go up to our pages. I'm going to go to our to-do item, our to-do eraser item. And this is the page that is going to show one item. So I want to add a parameter. I'm going to add a parameter. I want it to be called to-do ID, which seems fair. I'm going to add the page directive. So when I go to /todo and supply a to-do ID after that, I want it to go to this page. And I'm also saying that I want it to be an int. That's important to me. So if I, for some reason, would type something completely different, letters or characters or whatever, it's not going to find the path for this URL. And I'm going to show the to-do item edit, and I'm going to send in the to-do ID like that. Sweet, let's try this. So if I go to my to-do list, you'll see that I now have this item, this add item component. So if I write 1, 2, 3, and I press save item, it's going to say, hey, it needs to be more than 5 characters long. 4, 5, 6, and save item. And it's going to pop up down here right away. If I click the item, I will get to the to-do item page. I will be able to change it like that. And as you can see, the text box is going to be with a little checkbox down here. And if I go back to my to-do list, it's going to say with a 1, 2, 3, 7. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Did I forget a number? Did I do that? I did that. Can't even count today. I blame the caffeine.
So while you're forgetting the number 4, I do have a couple of questions, but one I think we can do right now. What do you think about Blazor Bootstrap component, the library? Should we use that one or the standard Bootstrap?
So I think that's a really good question. Thanks you, Daniel. I would say that start with no libraries at all. Try to make the best out of the components that already exist. It's very easy to just add classes or whatever you need. But at some point, you probably do want to download some components. Now, I haven't tried the Blazor Bootstrap components particularly. I think I've downloaded them and tried them out. But try to figure out what kind of components that you need at this moment in time and install those. Now, there are many component vendors out there. Telerik is one of them. We have Syncfusion, we have DevExpress. There's a lot of different component vendors out there. I've tried a lot of them, and being sponsored by Telerik, I can imagine that this sounds strange, but I worked with Telerik for many years, and their components they're just phenomenal, but they do cost money. But if you have a company, you should definitely invest in some of these components. But first, try plain vanilla. See what you need. Make sure that the component vendors you're choosing has that kinds of components as well. Did we have any more questions?
We do. We have or a suggestion. Maybe you can show how you can use events to get direct feedback with the validation.
I could do that. What are we talking? What is direct feedback in this case? Maybe you could write back, Johan. So Johan is on key up or on input. Yes, I could do that. Maybe not this demo though, because we have still a lot of things left to cover.
Awesome suggestion though.
It is. So I can mention that it is possible for you to change what kind of input that you're writing. In this case, you will get feedback when you move to another text box, or if you move away from the form, so the form input fields. But you can add on text. I actually don't know the syntax from the top of my head, but you can add the on input. You can look at the key down events instead. All right. So now we have client-side WebAssembly version. So normally what happens is that the browser is going to download JavaScript. It's going to parse the JavaScript, and it's going to compile the JavaScript. And then it's going to go into the JIT compiler, the JIT interpreter, sorry. With WebAssembly, you can bypass all of that. You can get the WebAssembly code directly into the JIT interpreter. There's no parsing, there's no compiling. You're going to get all of that goodness, and the JIT interpreter is going to understand, because WebAssembly is a byte language. So it understands WebAssembly right off the bat. So what Microsoft did was that they took the mono runtime, which is written in C, compiled that to WebAssembly, in this case, .NET.wasm. And the WebAssembly code, or the .NET runtime, it's then going to run your DLL, your app DLL. It's going to run Microsoft DLLs. And when I first saw this, and I went, so it's running the whole runtime inside of the browser. I felt a little bit sick to my stomach, because that doesn't sound good to me. But then I thought, wait a minute, it's actually running the whole .NET runtime inside of my browser. It's running the same DLLs that I'm running inside of the server-side version, but it's running on the full Windows server or Linux or whatever you're running it on. But you can take the same DLLs and run them inside of the browser. That's really cool. So this is how the server side works. We have the server, we have the eraser components, the render tree, the SignalR connection, the JavaScript, and the DOM. The difference between WebAssembly and the server is not that much. The only difference is really where the code is running. So in this case, the code is running inside of your browser. It's running on mono.wasm instead of the server. You still have the Razor component. You still have the Blazor components or the Blazor runtime. You have the render tree. You don't have SignalR. You have JS interrupts because the WebAssembly don't have access to the DOM. So you need to make sure, or in this case, JavaScript needs to update the DOM. So let's take a look at what WebAssembly would do.
But before that, I do have a question.
You do have a question?
Yes. Are the monolinker used? The linker that we use for Xamarin?
Daniel is full of really hard questions. Stop it. There is a linker used, but I'm not sure if... I assume that it's a monolinker because it's a mono.wasm, but I'm not sure if the monolinker is used or not. But some kind of linker is used, yes. So if we pop back to Visual Studio, we have the WebAssembly project. So I'm going to switch that to the startup, and I'm going to run project. Now, if I click the counter, you will see that it counts up. It does fetch the data, and I can click on my to-do list. You see I have the same items, I have the same look, and that is the same exact code that is running, but inside of the web browser. So let's take a look at what is happening here. If we go to network, I'm going to reload. This is one of the things that I did a demo of this just a couple of days ago, and as you can see, you download all the... No, you don't. There's no DLLs downloads here. So it apparently, we have some really smart caching mechanism involved here. Let's take a look at, I believe it's in here, right? So we have a cache storage. If I delete that cache storage, there we go. And I go back to network and I reload. Reload it completely, and it's not showing up. Did I do the wrong thing? Is it in here? Worst demo ever. Clear storage. Clear site data. Let's see if we can get some. It's running the wrong version. That's why. Let's close all the windows. There we go. Let's run it again. Now I think we got the right version. Let's see if we have some kind of... Now we have the right one. So we're going to pop back to our application. We're going to go into our cache storage. We're going to delete the cache storage. And as you can see, it's using the cache storage inside of the web browser. It's not using the normal cache. It's making sure that the DLLs is only going to be downloaded once. And it has some smart functionality to make sure that if the files change, it's going to download them again. So if you take a look at what is happening here, is that we're downloading a lot of data. We have the manamana.webassembly styles. We have boot.json. If we take a look at that one, you will see that it has information about what different files it needs to download, different assemblies used, and it's going to make sure that it's going to download all the .NET DLLs that it needs, and including the code that we wrote. So if we go to counter, clicking the counter, it works. There's no request going back to the server. Everything is just inside of the browser. Got the to-do items, looks the same. If I click delete, I'm going to get the JavaScript message, but everything is running inside of our web browser. This is pretty cool, I think. And the next thing is I'm going to demo Blossom. So Blossom is a project that I created at work and that Johan is helping out with as well, which is a grid component. In this case, it's a grid component. It has the potential of a lot of new other components as well. But right now, it's a grid component. And let's pop back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to go to the Mana project and to the fetch data. So instead of creating a table, creating a t-head, looping over all the items, what I can do is I can use the Blossom grid in this case. I can set the data to our forecasts array. I can set a page size. Now, one of the things that other vendors do is that you have to set the page size and then you have to set paging true or something like that. But I figured that if you're setting a page size, you probably want the data to be paged. You don't need to set the page size. I'm going to set it to sortable, and I want it to sort on the field date by default. I'm going to add grid columns. I'm going to add a field, a column for the date, and I'm going to supply a format for that as well. And then I can set the priority as well. So if the grid would be smaller, for example, on a phone, it can hide columns, and then it will have an expand button so it can show the data. So I'm going to add one for temperature. I'm going to add the highlight sign. Now, as you will see, the highlight sign doesn't make sense at all for the temperature. In our case, as I mentioned, I work for a bank, and we want the numbers to be blue for positive numbers, and we want it to be red for negative numbers. So in this case, just it's going to check that if it's a positive number, it's going to be blue. If it's 0, it's going to be black, or red if it's negative. I'm going to set the priority, and I'm also going to set a class called align right because I want the number to be aligned right. I'm going to add one for the temperature in Fahrenheit. Also have set a priority, and I want it to align right as well. And then one for the summary, and the same thing. I've got a priority 0, which is it's always going to show. So there we go. We need to add the namespace as well. I'm going to say using blossom.components. And we need to pop into the startup down here. I'm going to add Blossom here as well. So services add grid. It's actually called add Blossom. I have an old version here. It's called add Blossom right now. So if I run this now, I'm going to set the Mana project as a startup project. I'm going to run it. I think it's running the wrong project. Let's take a look again. It's running the WebAssembly project. Why is it doing that? Stop doing that. Mana project. It really shouldn't be doing that. Let's try it again. Maybe I just need to reload the page. There we go. So if I go to fetch data, you will see the components here. I can go back and forth. I can sort them. And it works, right? So this is one of the components that we use at work for our grid data. For some reason, I think I have forgotten to add the CSS classes. Let's see our host file. Here we go. Need to add the Blossom styles as well. So content blossom.components. So here I'm using _content. So this is to tell Blazor that I want the content of a library that I'm using. So I'm going to say _content / the name of the library, in this case blossom.components, and then the path to the CSS. I also need to add some JavaScript. The new version is this version is not .NET 5, but with the new version, you won't need to add this JavaScript. You will still need to add the Blazor Pro.Blazor size for a little bit longer. And we need to add font awesome as well. Like that. So let's take a look at it again. I'm going to go to the fetch data. There we go. You see the icon there. You see that -17 is red, which is I can see how Jessica is cringing here because this is not a good UX. But it apparently, well, to be honest, -17 would probably be hot for you. And what also should be working, let's see if it does. No, for some reason, yeah. You see here that the date has gone missing from the columns, and you can see it with an expand button instead. Sweet. One of the new features in .NET 5 is something called virtualize. And in the latest version of Blossom, it's actually using the virtualize component. So if you take a look at the virtualize, I've added a virtualize demo. So what it's doing is we're still adding the table in this case, but we're saying virtualize. We're using the virtualize Blazor component. We're going to say that the items is going to be the forecast items. I'm able to say context. So context is a way of setting the name of what each item is going to be called inside of the template. So in this case, I can say forecast. So this forecast and that forecast is going to be the same. I could have named it anything, but I chose forecast. And then I'm going to end the virtualized component. So the thing inside here is a template. And I'm calling the get forecast service 3 times because I want a lot of items in the list. So let's go to our virtualized component. There we go. Now, the really cool thing here is that if I go to the lowest item here, I'm going to go to here. Let's give me a little bit more space. As you can see here is that we have a table row. It says 2580 bracing. And then we have a really long div. So what the virtualize is doing is that it's only showing the items that is currently in view. The rest of them is going to be a really long div because we also want the slider to be in the right size. So if I now drag the slider, you will see that the item changes and the height of the div changes, but there is no lag or anything here. So the usual feedback that I get with the server-side version of Blazor is that it's lagging. It's a little bit more lag because the code isn't running inside the web browser. It's doing requests back and forth to the server. But as you can see here, it's pretty fast. There's no lag. I can't even see lag here. So if you're thinking about server-side or WebAssembly, lag is not an issue, to be honest. Now, when I was 7 years old, my parents came in with a box into my room. And in that box was my first real computer, or my first computer. Now, life is filled with defining moments of realization. And when I sat down with this machine, I realized that I wanted to become a developer. That I wanted to do this for a living. I mean, back then the apps was, well, this was a pretty advanced app, I guess. This is my first app, and it is available on GitHub. No joke. So you can definitely check that out. So many years passed, and I became a developer, and I thought that, would it be possible for me to write an emulator for the ZX Spectrum? So I sat down in the first iteration. It was in C. I just ported an emulator. Then with the Xbox 360, when it came out with XNA and stuff like that, I thought that maybe I should rewrite this in XNA. I did. Someone beat me to it, so I never released that version. But I kept working on it, making it better, and it has become my hello world. Whenever I face a new technology that I can some way master with C#, I try, can I implement the ZX Spectrum emulator? So I did. So this is my ZX Spectrum emulator running on C#, or written in C#, running on top of WebAssembly, the mono runtime compiled to WebAssembly, running on Blazor. If I go here, I can load Manic Miner. I can play the game. Now, I have never beaten this level, so I'm probably not even going to try this time. But as you can see, it's working. It's basically running. It's not running as fast, but it's not running in 50 frames per second, but pretty close to that. Come on. Oh, darn. I'm never going to be able to beat that level. So with that, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Do you have any questions? And if you feel, as I mentioned, I'm writing a book on Blazor. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them if I can. Write me on this email or tweet me or whatever, because it helps me validate that I'm actually covering everything that I want to in the book.
So I've been having a fun time in the chat. So I kind of zoned you out a bit. So I need to ask if you came around to talking about state managed when on server-side Blazor.
State management in what form? So we talked about saving it in the API. There is so let's talk about the dependency injection. There are 3 ways of handling dependency injection. One is transient. So transient means that it's going to create a new object every time you ask for it. Then we have scoped, which is going to create one object for the length of the SignalR connection. So if you want to save state on the server side, you can build a service that is using a scoped service and save the data to that, because it's going to be for that, for only that user, and again as for the length of the SignalR connection. You can also save data in local storage. So there is in .NET 5 there is I always forget the name of it. It's called protected local storage. So it's going to save the data in the browser, but it's going to save it in a protected way, so you won't be able to change it or read it back without the special secret key. So that's one way of doing it. You can also use singleton, but that is going to be the same for all the sessions or the connections to the server. WebAssembly works a little bit different when it comes to dependency injection. So the singleton is still going to be for all the users inside of your browser. Now, that is probably only you, or it is only you. So a singleton is only going to be inside your web browser. Scoped, same thing there. It's going to live for the length of the session, which is well, as long as your web browser is on, the session is on. So singleton and scoped is going to work the same way. It is the recommendation is to use scoped if you're thinking of using it in a manner that would be for that particular user, because if you want to port code between server side and client side, it should be you should use scoped when you're thinking about using it as a only for that particular user. When it comes to transient, that's going to work just the same. It's going to get you a new object whenever you ask for it. So that's one way of handling state management, and or just saving it to a database, of course.
Awesome. I do have another question.
Please.
Can I use VB?
No,
he was
just
joking.
kidding.
I had to put it in.
Of course.
So can you?
I don't think so. I'm not sure about that either, to be honest, but
I think that might have been all the questions. Let me ask if I've missed any questions. The chat has been amazing today.
Oh, awesome. Again, if you have any questions, please tweet me or email me or write a letter or whatever.
Write a letter?
Fax me.
You don't even have a fax.
How do you know?
That's true. Whatever you do, don't call him.
No, That's a good tip. I'm not using a phone for call.
I think that might be. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Can we find this solution on GitHub? We can find. I have linked Blossom and also the Spectrum emulator.
So
let me put them in once more.
The solution I've used now is not on GitHub. There's no reason for it not to be there, so I can definitely put it up there, and I can tweet about it. I'll tweet about it.
Awesome. Let me put in your GitHub so they know where to find it later as well.
Yeah, awesome.
We also did get a couple of good tips. Let's see here. For components, we did have... Now, where did it go? See, we've been very busy. Mons says hi.
Huh?
Here we go. We got a tip for components. So let's show that off. And they're very happy to use it, it seems.
There's, as I mentioned, there's a lot of component vendors out there. I would assume that they're really good, all of them. In my experience, why I personally have Telerik as one of the top component vendors is that they have an amazing support. They have it is the technicians that are working on the component that is handling the support. So if you have problems, you're not going to get have you tried this? Have you tried that? You're going to get the answer from the authors of the components right away, which is really, really good in my opinion.
Everybody should be like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's all for questions.
Sweet. Then thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks. Hopefully, we will have Egil Hansen here, and he's going to talk about testing with Blazor. So he's the author of the B-Unit project, which is the main way of testing components with Blazor. So in 2 weeks, the 10th of December, I believe, we will be back, and please join us then.